Hello there. In the final part of Lecture Series 7, I will look at amortization and internally generated intangible assets. In determining if an intangible asset should be amortized, we should look at the useful life of the asset, if it's finite or indefinite. The depreciable amount of an intangible asset with finite useful life shall be amortized on a systematic basis over the asset's useful life. In the case of an intangible asset with indefinite useful life, the asset is not amortized but shall be subject to impairment annually or when there is indication that the intangible asset may be impaired. The term indefinite does not mean infinite. An intangible asset shall be regarded as having an indefinite useful life if there is no foreseeable limit to the period over which the asset is expected to generate net cash inflows. An entity should at each reporting date review to determine whether events and circumstances continue to support an indefinite useful life assessment for that asset. Next, let's look at internally generated intangible assets. It's important to note in the separate financial statements of an entity, internally generated intangible assets generally cannot be capitalized, as it's difficult to establish the true benefit from the asset and to determine the cost of the asset reliably. An internally generated intangible asset acquired as part of a business combination, according to IFRS 3, business combinations must be recognized at fair value. This means that some internally generated assets, such as brands, which cannot be recognized in the subsidiaries' individual financial statements, are now recognized in the consolidated financial statements. Although it appears to be an inconsistency, but for the group, the assets are now not internally generated, but have actually been purchased as part of the subsidiary, thus meeting the criteria of arising from a legal or contractual right, regardless of whether those rights are transferable or separable from the entity or from other rights or obligations. Finally, let's look at research and development. IAS 38 defines research as original or planned investigation undertaken for gaining new scientific or technical knowledge and understanding. Development is the application of research findings or other knowledge to a plan or design for the production of new or substantially improved materials, devices, products, processes, systems, or services before the start of commercial production or use. To assess whether an internally generated intangible asset qualifies for recognition, IAS 38 requires an entity to classify the generation of assets into the research phase and the development phase. Expenditure incurred in the research phase shall be recognized as an expense when incurred. However, expenditure on the development phase shall be recognized as an intangible asset if the entity meets the strict criteria set out in IAS 38. For development expenditure to qualify for capitalization, it should be technically feasible and commercially viable. Thus, an entity should demonstrate all the following criteria can be met. 1. The technical feasibility of completing the intangible asset so that it will be available for use or sale. 2. Its intention to complete the intangible asset and then use or sell it. 3. How the intangible asset will generate probable future economic benefits by demonstrating, among others, the existence of a market for the output of the intangible asset or the intangible asset itself, or the usefulness of the intangible asset if it is to be used internally. 4. Availability of technical, financial, and other resources to complete the development and use or sell the intangible asset. Finally, of course, its ability to measure reliably the expenditure attributable to the intangible asset during its development. Please be reminded, capitalization commences upon meeting all the criteria. Thus, any expenditure charged to the profit or loss as a consequence of not meeting the criteria cannot subsequently be capitalized at a later date. This concludes Lecture Series 7, focusing on the definition, recognition criteria, measurement principles, and finally, internally generated intangible assets. The next lecture series will look at IAS 36, impairment of assets. Till then, thank you and have a nice day.